50 years ago, a best-selling book claiming to be a leaked government report stated that elites should use the fear of aliens to keep their populations under control. Is that why UFOs are in the news? UFO stories are all over the news again. After the Chinese surveillance balloon was finally shot down by the US Air Force a few weeks ago, multiple reports have been coming out of various sky phenomena appearing around the world. Despite not knowing what they are, governments have been shooting them down. Now, the Pentagon calls them UAPs, unidentified anomalous phenomena, and poured kerosene on the fire last week when an official admitted during a press conference that authorities weren't able to identify what the craft are. Now, this isn't new though. Reports of UAPs from official sources in the US government have been coming out fairly regularly in recent years. Of course, no evidence is produced, no conclusions are reached, just headlines are generated. These outlandish stories are multiplying the sense of fear and foreboding Western publics are feeling right now. Ominous events and stories abound. Wars and rumors of wars. Russia, for example, last week deployed a nuclear-armed fleet to the Baltic Sea for the first time in 30 years. Not good. Shortages continue. Strange disasters are happening daily, like that train derailment in Ohio that even created a mushroom cloud. Interest rates continue to rise while debt levels are at historically unimaginable levels globally. People are uneasy and disturbed. And right when skepticism of the ability of the powers that be to manage things is spiking, we get aliens. These mass fear events are something we denizens of the West are used to, though. They are curiously absent from life outside the West, however. Isn't that strange? I've lived in several Asian countries and I've visited many other places around the world, and there weren't any of these mass terror campaigns going on. People were generally optimistic about the world and about their future. They weren't being scared by the news all the time. Mass fear events have been rolled out in the West, though, for decades. I can remember as a kid in the late 80s telling my mother that I hadn't been able to sleep properly for weeks because I was worried about the hole in the ozone layer and AIDS. That fear was coming, of course, from the television. News shows were telling everyone that hairspray was melting the polar ice caps due to ozone depletion, and TV ads were running repeatedly in Australia which showed the Grim Reaper bowling people down, warning them about AIDS. Now, I was told to just forget about it, bury it. Only many years later did I realise that the ozone layer thing was ridiculous nonsense, and that as long as I avoided certain risky lifestyles and behaviours, AIDS wasn't going to be a worry. The Cold War itself was a massive fear event, used by governments to justify endless expansion of the military-industrial complex and the ongoing curtailment of individual liberties by intelligence agencies. When the USSR finally and suddenly fell at the start of the 90s, the mood of jubilation and optimism continued right through into the millennium and peaked in 2000. Then, of course, 2 planes took down 3 buildings in New York, and the mass fear agenda was back. Now, this video isn't about who is behind these various mass fear events. Questioning that leads to conspiracy theories, and we definitely don't want to talk about them here. In a way, focusing on whether events occurred the way that the official narratives say that they did is kind of beside the point. The point I'm making here isn't that a shadowy financial cabal directs events behind the scenes using politicians and the media as puppets. It's that governments, through the media, use the mass fear these terror events generate to push through tyrannical legislation, shut down free speech, normalize expansion of police powers by the state, and create more easily controlled and manipulated populations. They are a divide, demoralize, and control strategy. The polar ozone is depleting. The ice caps are melting. Sea levels are rising. Extremists are everywhere. Fascism is resurrecting. And now the aliens have arrived. All of this was laid out very clearly, though, in a best-selling book published 50 years ago. The report from Iron Mountain, published in 1967, and said to have been written by a special study group of 15 elite experts, laid out how the Western elites should respond to the growing complexity of keeping our societies under control in the post-war world. According to the authors, said to have included famous intellectuals like economist John Kenneth Galbraith, the West faced a grave problem in the post-nuclear world. In their elite minds, war is necessary as it reduces population pressures, helps maintain economic activity, and ensures the continued necessity of government. And that last one is the most important one. The problem was and is, of course, that war between great powers now risks nuclear annihilation. The authors of the report could also see that at some point peace would break out with the Soviet Union, and the enormous government expansion which had taken place from World War I through the Depression into World War II and through the Cold War would come under threat. The people would want their liberties back once those threats disappeared, and that was unacceptable to the Western elite. The solution proposed by the Special Study Group required the use of credible substitutes for warfare, such as the reintroduction of slavery via technology and political processes, the threat of gross pollution of the environment, and yes, reports of aliens. And what do you know? Since 1967, we've had the steady enslavement of the tax-paying middle class via the expansion of the welfare state and income taxes. This has happened in every Western country and has destroyed the standard of living of the wealth-creating class. We've had global warming propaganda pumped into every school and university, convincing young people that they have no future unless they destroy industrial civilization. And now we've got aliens. These are not real threats. Maddeningly though, right now we do have the very real threat of that shooting war with Russia we managed to avoid throughout the Cold War. The danger is real. NATO expansionism has made the Russians feel that they are cornered, and the Russians are a mighty people. So are the Chinese. They'll not roll over before Yankee imperialism. They'll fight. And yet, this threat is being downplayed by our elites. I'm not worried about the UFOs. Our governments are so incompetent, having little green men running things would probably be an improvement. I'm worried about World War III, and for the same reasons. We are ruled by weak people who know only how to use spin, propaganda, and mass fear to manipulate gullible populations. They'll be hyperventilating in their bunkers while we're facing the ICBMs. They can hide under mountains all they like, but it won't save them.